Hello and welcome to the second episode of The Local Lift. The first episode was us introducing ourselves, basically the hosts, and this time we've got a guest on called Stacey. We'll go round to Stacey first, but Natalia, do you want to quickly reintroduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Natalia, and I'm leading the content at Mirador.
Okay, and my name's Jerry. I'm the VP of Growth. And Stacey, do you want to introduce yourself quickly?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. So I'm Stacey. I am an analytics freelancer and trainer. I've been doing it now for about roughly 8 years. I specialize in Google Analytics and particularly in implementation and a bit of CRO on the side as well.
Okay, and Stacey, do you want to kind of give us an elevator pitch as to why people should use, what's the name of your agency?
Sharper Digital.
Go for it.
Why you should go with me is because I have been working with GA4 for a long time before it even was GA4 by accident. I've done many GA4 migrations and implementations now. I've worked many industries, so e-commerce, retail, travel, betting, yeah, many industries. A lot of experience across the board and really focus on getting you that best implementation of analytics possible to drive really accurate and impactful insight.
A little bit of background, Stacey and I actually briefly worked together for about, was it 6 months? I don't know. How long was it before I ran away?
About, yeah, nearly a year, I think, just under a year.
Okay. It was certainly interesting. When Stacey and I first worked together, she looked at the analytics implementation that I'd done and just looked at me in horror, which was not unusual for people to kind of do that. It's good that we're talking about GA4 because that's one of the big topics of conversations. But first of all, I think we need to talk about UTM parameters. The reason why is twofold. One of them is we talk about it a lot in Google Local and why you should put them on Google My Business and or Google Business Profiles as they're now called. And I feel like a lot of people don't fully understand what they're all about.
Hmm.
So, Stacey,
Yeah.
question one. Tell us about UTM parameters. What are they? And do you know what UTM actually stands for?
I do, yes. It actually stands for Urchin Tracking Module because actually Google acquired a company called, platform called Urchin Analytics, uh, kind of late 90s, I think it was, early 2000s, something like that. Um, and then it's just kind of been reiterated and evolved from Urchin Analytics. The UTM parameters were from way back then, really. The purpose of them are they are put at the end of a URL within a query string. And yeah, the purpose of them is so that we can tell analytics where traffic is coming from. When they get to your website. So through what medium in particular?
So, what sort of mediums are okay? I guess what the best thing to do is kind of quickly best practice because
Mm.
generally when I'm talking to somebody, I talk about free UTM parameters, but I think is there six? How many? Do you know how many there are? Is there five or six?
I think there's six. So there's source, medium, content, campaign, ID, and term, I
Yeah,
think.
yeah, I think you're right.
Feels like a
Yeah,
quiz.
no, it's all good because I have to be honest.
Yeah.
I'm like thinking to myself. I'm glad that I wasn't asked this question because I probably would have got them wrong. But the main three are source, medium, and content, isn't it? Which one of the three require?
Yeah. Only source and medium are mandatory. In GA4, content and campaign are no longer, well, they were never really mandatory in Universal Analytics, but important, whereas now there's only source and medium that's actually mandatory in GA4.
Okay. So basically, when we're looking at traffic and we're sort of talking about sources, what would you give an example of a common source, for instance?
So source, I define as kind of the name of where that traffic has come from. So, for example, if you're coming through Facebook, Facebook would go into the source, and social would be the medium.
Perfect. And what are the other sort of common mediums that people use at the moment?
So the most common one really is Google. So we have Google search, of course, but you have organic search and you have paid search. So to recognize the difference between the two of those, you would use you'd still use Google as the source, but then organic search or CPC as the medium instead.
Yeah, it's interesting you chose that one because actually that's the one that you don't really put UTM tracking tags on normally, do
No.
you? And the reason for that is because you have GCL IDs or it's just picked up naturally. So basically, Google automatically buckets some things automatically without UTM tags. And then sometimes it'll require the UTM tags. You mentioned social, for
Mhm.
instance. It's quite common that, when we're putting tweets out, do we call them X's now? I don't really know. I'm struggling with the fact that everything gets
I'll never
renamed
call
and
them that.
rebranded. You're never going to call them an
Yeah.
X, you know.
I'm never going to call them that. It's always going to be Twitter and tweets to me.
Thanks. I'm on the same boat. I've got too many X's as it is. But basically, sorry, bad joke. Basically, yeah. So we often don't really tag these things up because we kind of see the referrer and it comes in and other bits and pieces.
Mhm.
But when would you kind of say that actually when you are tagging up, it is really, really important?
It's specifically really important when you're putting out potentially a campaign that is very has some very specific content, especially, and a very specific purpose, and like I say, part of a very specific campaign, so that you can measure the impact of that campaign. So, for example, let's say you are running a Black Friday campaign that's quite big, and you might have that across multiple mediums, multiple channels. Um, it'd be really important to make sure that you're putting that campaign in the tracking so that regardless of what channel you're using, you can all attribute it to the same campaign. So UTM campaign contains Black Friday 2023 or something like that. So that's where it's important where you might want to do the manual tagging and avoid using just the automatic referral that GA4 does. So that yeah, you've got a better a clearer measurement of the impact of your campaign.
So do you use any tools to kind of make your kind of tags? Is there anything that you actually do to kind of change the URLs to append the UTM strings at all? I personally was used to use a Google Sheet, but I know everyone's got a different approach.
I generally just have my own spreadsheet that builds them kind of for me. You can use, if you're just doing something that's one-off, you could use Google's campaign link builder tool, and that will help you kind of step by step if you're new to building UTM links. That will help you guide you through the process. But generally, I just use a spreadsheet where I have a column for each of the parameters, so I can bulk bulk create a lot of links.
Perfect. Natalia, have you got any questions at this point? Does it all make total sense?
But total sense, yeah, completely. No, I guess it's just there's sort of any risks and interesting issues that you've kind of come across with UTM parameters.
Yes, where people in particular put either special characters or spaces in the parameters, yeah, just don't do that. So the reason for that is, of course, that can break it. It is the main thing. But also some special characters are um, wild cards, so they might actually do something to the URL. But always avoid special characters and spaces. Hyphens, underscores are kind of fine. But yeah, I would avoid them where possible, really.
Perfect. Interesting fact, did you know you can put emojis in them? So if a company really, really annoys you, you can just send them loads and loads of poo emojis into their Google Analytics. And, I wouldn't do it myself, of course, but interesting case. We do actually have Jono on in a week or two, basically talking through some bits and pieces. And he actually did a talk. And as part of it, we kind of played around with his analytics and inserted loads of emojis into his analytics. So yeah, you can put emojis into it, which is kind of a fun one. What about on internal
Yeah.
links? Should you tag up your internal links with UTM parameters?
No. So the reason for this is because if you are navigating on your same website, same domain specifically, if you're moving between pages on there, if you were to put a UTM link in between those, it can actually break the session. I know there's not exactly such thing as a session as such with GA4 anymore, but still it can apply an incorrect session source for that user on that session, and potentially erase the correct uh, source of where they've actually come from. So definitely don't recommend doing that.
Perfect. That is good to know because I kind of see that
Mhm.
quite frequently, and I'm always wondered if it's a bad thing to do or if I've just always kind of preached against it. You've mentioned GA4 quite a bit already. Love it, hate it?
I love it. I've spent that long in it now. I find it, not that I would go into Universal Analytics really now anyway. Now it's dead, RIP. But for even the past year, I've been so used to using GA4 now that I'm less familiar with Universal Analytics. It's a bit crazy, really.
Do you think that a lot of the resistance to change is the kind of the main reason that all of us old analytics people hate GA4?
Um, Yeah, I do actually. I do agree with that. I think that people need to spend more time in it and to get used to it. But the main thing is ensuring that the implementation is right because no analytics tool is any good if you don't put time, investment, and purpose into your implementation because your insight is going to be worthless and it's just going to be barren, basically. I always like to think of it like a garden. If you're not planting anything, if you're not thinking about what you're doing with it, you're not going to get any insight out of it and it's going to be useless to you. So anyone that feels like that, I invite you to think about your implementation and maybe that's the problem, not the tool.
I have to be honest, I'm still kind of just chucking it on it and twiddling it and doing other bits and pieces at the moment. But I think I need to kind of really learn how to use GA4. It's definitely the topic at the moment. Stacey, have you used any other packages other than GA, or do you kind of look at any others at the moment at all?
Not at the moment, I don't know. I just focus on GA. A long time ago, I used Adobe for a little bit.
Hmm.
But yeah, I've always just focused on Google really.
Okay, perfect. I have to be honest, I still struggle with simple things like I can't find how to kind of get a simple list of the landing pages and the conversion rate of them or something simple like that. And I know bounce rate's something that you and I have discussed at length in the past, and I kind of always had a bit of a hatred of the use of bounce rate, but that was mainly because it was used in much more of a site-wide metric. But I kind of miss things like bounce rate and other bits and pieces from a landing page report. Do you think that GA4 requires a little bit more of an expert level, or is it just because of the fact that I'm kind of not used to it and I'm used to the old GA? But when I kind of play around with the new GA4, I find myself not able to kind of find the reports and the data that I want.
Yeah, definitely. And that's because we're moving from the previous data model of Universal Analytics, which was session data, and where it I guess in the back end it sessionized all of the data that came through. And GA4 doesn't do that. Everything is event based and user based. And it's changing that perspective now of understanding that looking at everything as if it's an event rather than a session. And it is still possible to do that. It's still possible to understand. It's no longer bounce rate. It's now engagement rate. It's the flip reverse of bounce rate and actually a better definition, a more realistic term of what users do on websites in regards to engagement. But yeah, you can still get that data, and that it's just coming at it with a different perspective. That's all. So I can assure you that it's there. You just need to, yeah, change your perspective.
Okay. I mean, one of the things I do is I plug it all into Data Studio, which
Yeah.
again is a bit like the situation with Twitter and X is it's now called Looker Studio, and things are kind of moved around a bit more. But I'm still very much a massive user of it, and I still plug all my data into it and find that that's kind of changing a lot. All the kind of the tools that I used to know and love have sort of come for a bit of an evolution. Are you still very much a user of Looker? Should we call it Looker Studio or Data Studio?
It's definitely called Looker Studio, but again, I struggle I've called it Data Studio for so many years. I think I'm going to struggle to ever get my head around Looker Studio.
Yeah.
But yeah, I use it frequently. I build it for pretty much most of my clients. So after doing a new implementation, I'll wait a little bit and then I'll provide them with a report, because sometimes it can be a little bit. I try to see GA4 as the data collection part of it, and where you can go in and you can get some insights. I believe explorations are for deep dives and insights. And I see Data Studio as your visualization to it, your window into the data. So whenever I've done a migration, I often offer to build a report at the end of it so that the client can then see the so what. What was the point of all of this investment, and easily kind of consume that insight rather than just clicking around in GA4 aimlessly.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Actually, building on what you've just said about a lot of people do seem to be using BigQuery now more than ever before. Have you started using that yourself, or?
No, but it's kind of the next thing on my, I guess, personal development list. I'm noticed just at the moment, a lot of clients are coming to me in their kind of bottom end of their data maturity at the moment. But of course, with the data retention restrictions, more and more are starting to consider BigQuery and the opportunities that that brings as well when it comes to deep diving insights. I think it's really important to definitely have that in the back of your mind.
Yeah.
Maybe not in the short term, but definitely in the long term.
No, I have to be honest, it's definitely on my roadmap. Okay, I think that's our main questions. Natalia, have you got any questions for Stacey?
Yeah, so these are a bit more like basic questions, but I think it's really good to kind of know. So what would you say the key differences between GA4 and Universal Analytics are so far?
So I briefly touched on it before, but the key difference is the data model. So yeah, as I mentioned, Universal Analytics definitely worked on a user session hit, page view and hit data model. Whereas now we're moving towards just user and event model. And actually, a lot of other analytics tools have been doing this event model for a long time. It's just that kind of Google's kind of catching up in a way. And I guess the objective and the reason why Google's brought out this new version and developed it in the way that it has is to go along with real life user behavior, that we do visit websites across multiple devices, and we are mobile first now, and that's kind of the point of it. And why it works in the way that it does. But yeah, that's kind of the key difference. There is still a lot of similarities, but that main one, it just takes a bit to kind of get your head around, really.
Yeah, I remember when
Yeah.
we called Apple Web. It came out of a tool
Hmm.
called Apple Web, which was a bit of a strange one when it first came out. It was a bit like, what is this? And it was great for apps. And then when you're connecting websites at the same time, it was kind of good. But then they kind of went, oh, replacing GA with it. It was a bit of a, no, no, you can't take away my toys. But yeah.
Yeah, exactly that actually. And I was really kind of privileged that quite a few years ago I worked on analytics on an app when it was app and web and Firebase analytics, and that was when the two were starting to combine. And unbeknown to me, that was what we know now today as GA4. So I was quite lucky that I got to do that project, and then I guess evolve and mature with it and see the tool mature over time to what we have today. And I feel that kind of, as I mentioned at the beginning, puts me at quite a good advantage of that. I've seen it through those stages, which is quite lucky, really.
Yeah, completely. This is going to be the question that nobody wants to answer. How do you feel about user privacy? Without mentioning anything I might have done in the past. How do you feel about kind of user privacy? I mean, cookie statements and everything, the amount of data that we're able to collect voluntarily is diminishing quite rapidly. And the latest version of iPhones and bits and pieces, it's really changing the shape in which we can track data. In fact, I've heard recently that iPhones might be stripping off UTM parameters. I don't know if you've heard that one.
Oh, I haven't heard that one, but that's not cool.
Basically, I've heard that like iPhones and Safari might be stripping off sort of tracking parameters and other bits and pieces. It's kind of a hot topic in some circles at the moment. But yeah, so cookie statements, other bits and pieces. How do you feel about the fact that people are rejecting cookies more and more, and we're losing kind of an accuracy of data?
Yeah, so everyone has that right, and I definitely think it's the right thing to do, that you should be transparent and open about what you're tracking, what you're doing with that data, with the user. I think there could be better education out there for users, that we're not all devils. We're not looking to sell your data and do really awful things with it. Kind of the point of it is to ensure that you're being served the content that is relevant to you. So and yes, Google does build kind of, I guess, a bit of a persona about you and makes assumptions about your behavior in comparison to other people that look similar to you. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. That's so that you're seeing, as I say, content that is relevant. So yes, I think privacy and being clear and transparent about what you're doing with those cookies is incredibly important. But yeah, I think there should be some better advice to users on what it's for. And I always use examples where the copy and content is really good and clear of why that is. In regards to the kind of gaps in data that we get as a result of it, that's just going to happen. That's just as a result of, I would rather lose a little bit of data and be clear and transparent with the user and what we're doing with it. But with GA4, if you set up your consent mode correctly, with your content management software, you do have the ability to use modeling to fill that gap, where again, it uses data science and things that are far smarter than I am, and someone can explain that far better than I can, but to make up for that small gap in insight. Also, we need to kind of understand that our analytics tools they're marketing tools. That's what they're for. They're not your single source of truth. You should be using proper reporting software for things like, revenue, etc. If we shift our perspective to think that, well, we're using this to aid our marketing, well, then, if you have, it's a good kind of proxy of assumption of what users are wanting, rather than trying to aim to get 100% perfect and accurate data. It's just unrealistic.
How are you finding your clients agree with you on that? Do you find that
Oh, they
clients?
don't. They
I think
don't.
I've had experiences where it's like, why is the analytics different to this? And it's like, well, it's 2% out, it's 5% out. What are you stressed about? And it just feels like they don't quite understand the fact that there's people
Yeah.
like me who browse with certain plugins which block Google Analytics at times and all sorts of other bits and pieces. And we sometimes like to be tracked, we don't mind it, but sometimes we don't want to be fully tracked. So, it is one of those things that understanding the accuracy, especially as well, I didn't realize just how bad Google Analytics was for sampling as well. One of the interesting things that we found out recently is just the sheer amount of sampling that goes on, and the fact that, sometimes Google Analytics will say week on week you're down when actually you're up, and vice versa. The rate of sampling in Google Analytics is far higher than I think people kind of realize as well. Cool. I think that kind of leads us nearly to the end. And your business name is Sharper, right?
Yes, Sharper Digital, yeah.
Why did you call it that?
Because my maiden name is Harper, so S Harper, and Sharper is a name that I've been called kind of since childhood, really, since school. It's a nickname that I've always had. And actually, it was my dad's idea to call my business Sharper Digital because it has quite a good ring to it.
Yes, it does. And you're not going to rename it now that you're going to call it Scooper?
No, doesn't
Okay.
quite have the same ring to it. Scooper Digital, I don't think sounds as quite, yeah. I don't know how I would want to work with something called Scooper Digital.
Brilliant. Okay, and where can we find you? LinkedIn or Twitter or X
Yeah,
or
LinkedIn and Twitter, Stacey Cooper. I think my handle on Twitter is Stacey L Cooper. On LinkedIn, it's Stacey One Cooper because I've discovered apparently it's a very popular name. Yeah, I also have a website and Google My Business setup,
Brilliant.
so you can look for
Awesome.
Sharper Digital.
Brilliant. And are you updating your Google business profile with regularity?
Regular enough, actually. Yeah, yeah.
Perfect. Brilliant. Okay, well, thank you so much for your time.
No, thank you.
If you want to hear more from local experts, along with Natalia and myself, then please like and subscribe or visit us on miradorlocal.com/local lift to find out more.